Episode 1. The First Glow. They said the monastery of St. Aurelius had been abandoned for nearly a century, buried in snow, swallowed by silence. When I arrived, the air itself seemed reluctant to move, as if even the wind feared to trespass. The great wooden doors groaned open under my hand, breathing out a century of dust and decay. The scent of wax, mold, and something metallic, something like blood, lingered in the cold air. I was sent here to restore what remained of this holy place. The Vatican archives spoke of it only briefly. A structure of uncertain consecration. That phrase should have warned me. But I was young then, too certain that light, any light, must come from God. The chapel was smaller than I'd imagined, yet its presence was immense. Rows of pews bowed under age, their wood scarred with deep claw-like marks. At the center stood an altar made of white marble, cracked but strangely radiant, as though it remembered a light that had never gone out. And above it, a crucifix whose Christ seemed not to suffer but to watch. I made my first prayer at sunset. The candles were long dead, so I used my flashlight, laying it on the altar while I read from the Book of Psalms. My voice echoed through the hollow nave, and for a moment, I felt something answer, a low vibration beneath the floor, like the hum of an organ with no sound. Then my flashlight flickered. Once, twice, and then it died. But the altar did not. A faint luminescence bled from the cracks in the marble, spreading like veins of molten gold. I stepped closer, heart pounding, the prayer still trembling on my lips. The glow pulsed, slow, alive, and I swear I heard a breath. Not my own, not human. My knees weakened. I whispered, "Lord, is this you?" The light dimmed for a heartbeat, then flared violently, blinding me. When I opened my eyes again, a single phrase had been burned into the marble, as if written by invisible fire. "I was here before your God." The words throbbed with heat. The air turned thick, pressing against my chest, and the crucifix above the altar began to weep. Not tears, but a thin trickle of black fluid. I stumbled backward, gripping the edge of a pew to keep from falling. My mind screamed to run, but something deeper, something ancient, whispered for me to kneel. I should have left that night. I should have sealed the doors and called for Rome, but I stayed. Because beneath my terror, beneath every trembling breath, there was fascination. The altar was glowing again, and this time, it seemed to recognize me. Episode 2. Voices Beneath the Hymn. The next morning, the altar was cold. No trace of the glow remained, no sign of the words that had burned themselves into its surface. Only marble, smooth and pale, as though the night before had been a fever dream. Yet I knew what I'd seen. I could still smell the smoke. I began to question myself. Fatigue, perhaps. Hallucination from the altitude and isolation. But then I remembered the sound. That soft breath from nowhere. That pulse that had matched my heartbeat. No dream could hum with such hunger. I decided to test it. At dusk, I brought a recorder, an old handheld device from the sacristy's forgotten drawers. I placed it near the altar, switched it on, and began to pray aloud. My voice echoed through the chapel, calm at first, then trembling. Every word felt heavy, as if weighed down by unseen hands. When I finished, I let the silence stretch, staring into the marble's faint reflection of my own tired face. Nothing happened. No glow, no whisper, only the lonely sound of the wind pressing against stained glass. But later, when I replayed the recording, I heard it, between my words, underneath them, like a shadow wearing my voice. Something whispered back. Soft, rhythmic, deliberate. At first I thought it was static, but then it formed words, faint but unmistakable. Keep praying. The voice was neither male nor female. It sounded tired, as if it had been waiting too long. I froze. The recorder hissed softly, then played the phrase again, but slower, drawn out, as though it had noticed I was listening. Keep praying. My hands shook so violently the device slipped and hit the floor. The sound distorted, and for an instant, the altar light flickered again, just once, like a dying heart. I wanted to flee, but the voice followed me, echoing in my head long after the recorder fell silent. It wasn't commanding, it was pleading. A beggar's prayer, desperate to be remembered. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing it faintly behind the walls, behind the wind. Keep praying. At midnight, I returned to the chapel. The moon hung low, bathing the altar in silver. I whispered a single prayer, just to quiet the voice. The light came instantly this time, gentle, beautiful, terrifying. It spread across the marble like veins awakening, and for a brief, breathless second, I saw shadows forming inside the glow. Hands, hundreds of them, reaching upward, as if trapped beneath the surface. The air tasted like iron. My throat tightened. And then the voice spoke again, not from the recorder, but from the altar itself. You opened it again. The glow flared once more, and every candle in the chapel lit at once. I fell to my knees. The light was watching me. Episode 3. The Monk Without Eyes. By the third night, I had stopped pretending I wasn't afraid. Fear had become a companion. Silent, steady, breathing beside me in the dark halls of St. Aurelius. Every creak of the old wood, every gust of wind that hissed through the chapel doors felt like a whisper in a language I was not meant to know. It was then that I saw him. The monastery had been empty, or so I'd believed. Yet when I stepped into the cloister that evening, I noticed a candle burning far down the corridor, trembling as if held by an unsteady hand. A shadow moved against the far wall, tall, thin, and swaying with an unnatural grace. "Brother?" I called. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. The figure stopped, then turned. He was a monk, wrapped in tattered robes the color of ashes. His face was pale, almost waxen, and where his eyes should have been, there were only two dark sunken hollows, sealed with scars. "Don't come closer," he said softly. His voice cracked like brittle parchment. "If you still see the light, it means it has chosen you." My breath caught. "You've seen it too." "I saw it," he whispered, "and that was my sin." He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers finding the air around me with the accuracy of memory. It started as a glow, a beautiful one. It promised revelation. It promised peace. But light can lie, Father, and sometimes it hungers for what sees it. I asked who he was, but he ignored the question. Instead, he touched the wall beside him and traced a shape I couldn't see. "They buried the first altar," he said, "deep beneath the chapel. The one you see now is only a mouth. The true altar still breathes." My heart pounded. "You're saying there's another?" He nodded, his blind eyes turning toward the chapel as though he could still feel the glow through the walls. "I tore out my eyes so it would stop calling me," he murmured. "But I still dream of it. It sings beneath the floor like a heart that refuses to die." Then he stepped closer, his face inches from mine. I could smell the faint rot of old incense on his robes. "If it speaks your name, Father." "Never answer." Before I could reply, a low hum filled the corridor, the same vibration I'd felt beneath the altar. The walls themselves seemed to tremble. The monk flinched violently, covering his face with both hands. "It hears us!" he cried. "The light hears!" The candle in his hand flared suddenly bright and went out. When I blinked, he was gone. Only the faint scent of smoke remained. I ran back to the chapel, breathless. The altar was glowing again, faint but alive, like something that had been listening all along. And from somewhere deep below the stone floor, a sound rose, a heartbeat. Slow, measured, waiting. Episode 4. Ashes in the holy water morning came, but it felt wrong. The sunlight that crept through the chapel windows had no warmth, as if it had been filtered through glass touched by death. Dust swirled lazily in the air, and for a moment, I thought I could see shapes forming in it. Fleeting outlines of hands, of faces, reaching, then vanishing. The altar no longer glowed, yet the silence it left behind was unbearable, like a scream held between breaths. I could still hear faint echoes beneath the floor, that steady heartbeat that did not belong to any living thing. I went to the baptismal font to bless myself, hoping ritual might ground me. The stone basin was veiled with a thin layer of dust. I dipped my fingers in and froze. The water was black, not murky, not shadowed. Black. A dense liquid darkness that seemed to absorb the light around it. I lifted my hand, and something clung to my skin. Tiny flakes of ash, fine as silk. At first, I thought it might be soot, remnants of old candles. But when I stirred the surface, the ashes began to swirl on their own, forming slow, deliberate patterns. A spiral, then a line, then a shape unmistakably human. A hand. My heart pounded as the hand-shaped shadow drifted upward, pressing gently against the surface of the water as if trying to break through. I whispered a prayer. Deliver us from evil. And the water rippled violently, spilling over the edge. Something inside the font was moving. I stepped back as the black liquid began to boil. Steam rose in ghostly threads, carrying with it the scent of burnt incense and rot. Then, through the trembling water, I saw something glimmer, a sliver of gold like the edge of a coin. I reached in, trembling, and drew it out. It wasn't a coin. It was a tooth, wrapped in thin gold leaf, engraved with Latin words, Lux Veritatis. The light of truth, as I held it, the font stilled. The water cleared. Only a faint film of ash remained, resting at the bottom like the residue of some ancient fire. And then, faintly, from the chapel walls, a whisper, "Confess it." I spun around. No one was there, but the air carried a strange vibration, like a voice traveling through stone. "Confess what?" I asked aloud, though my voice trembled. The reply came from the altar itself, soft and hollow. "Your faith." The crucifix above the altar began to drip again, that same black fluid, thick and slow, falling one drop at a time into the holy water. Each drop hissed like burning oil. I backed away, clutching the golden tooth in my hand until it cut my palm. Behind me, the wind howled through the broken windows, carrying with it the faint echo of the blind monk's voice. It hungers for what believes, and I realized then, the more I prayed, the stronger it became. Episode 5. The Letter from the Vatican. The morning after the incident at the baptismal font, I woke to the sound of something sliding beneath my door. It was soft, deliberate, like a whisper turned physical. When I looked down, I found a letter sealed with crimson wax. I hadn't told anyone where I was. The monastery was weeks from any village, and the last post had come years ago. Yet the envelope was addressed precisely to Father Gabriel Moreau, custodian of St. Aurelius. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, yellowed but pristine, the handwriting elegant, almost too perfect, a script that seemed drawn rather than written. It read, "Father Moreau, cease all prayer at the altar. Do not record it, do not speak its name. You were sent to restore stone, not awaken memory. If the light calls, you must not answer, not again. We will come for you before the feast of St. Michael." The Congregation of the Silent Office, Vatican City. There was no signature, no seal of authenticity. Yet the words carried the weight of something official, or something older. I read the letter again, heart pounding. Before the feast of St. Michael. That was 2 weeks away. But how did they know about the altar? About the light? I'd written no reports, sent no word. I turned the letter over and my blood ran cold. At the bottom corner, written faintly in dried ink, or blood, was a date. September 29th, 2035. 10 years in the future. I stared at it for a long time, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the ink, an error. But the numbers were unmistakable, and as I held the paper to the light, I realized something else. The parchment was slightly warm, as if it had been pressed against a living body. A sudden knock shattered the silence. I turned sharply. No one was at the door. But when I stepped into the corridor, the same letter was there again, identical, folded neatly, the wax still wet. I ran back inside and placed the two side by side. The handwriting was exactly the same, the ink still fresh. Yet as I watched, the first letter began to darken, the words fading until only one phrase remained, burned into the paper like a brand. "You have already failed." The wind outside rose into a mournful howl, shaking the stained glass until the saints' faces fractured with light. I fell to my knees, clutching the letter, whispering the only prayer that came to mind. And from the chapel below, faint but clear, came the sound of footsteps, slow, dragging, as if someone barefoot was walking toward the altar. I knew I was alone, and yet the bells of St. Aurelius began to ring. No one had touched them in 100 years. Episode 6. The Mirror That Confessed. I had not slept for 3 nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of the altar's glow, pulsing softly, like a heartbeat beneath stone. Even in waking hours, I could feel its rhythm echoing behind my ribs. I tried to pray, but prayer had begun to feel dangerous, like breathing too close to fire. On the fourth night, I decided to move my quarters to the old confessional. It was small, narrow, almost coffin-like, but I felt safer surrounded by walls. There was a mirror nailed to one side, its silver surface clouded with age. When I leaned close, I saw myself, hollow-eyed, lips cracked, collar crooked. Yet the reflection felt wrong, too still. I blinked. It didn't, I froze. My pulse hammered. I blinked again, deliberately, and this time, the reflection smiled. The expression was faint, but it was mine, and not mine. Calm, patient, waiting. "Who are you?" I whispered before realizing how absurd the question was. The mirror fogged slightly as if something inside it had exhaled. Then, faintly, letters began to appear in the condensation, written backward, trembling as though by an unseen hand. "Confess." I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. My breath caught in my throat. The mirror cleared again, showing only my own terrified face. For a long time, I didn't move. I simply watched myself, praying silently, hoping my reflection would move with me again. It didn't. Instead, its lips began to move independently, shaping silent words. I leaned closer, straining to understand. It was praying. My reflection was praying for me. A shiver crawled down my spine. "Stop," I whispered. "Stop this." The reflection froze. Its eyes lifted, not to me, but to something over my shoulder. I turned. The confessional's curtain was trembling. The faint sound of whispering filtered through. Hundreds of voices speaking at once. Too low to understand, too close to ignore. Then the mirror's surface began to darken, rippling like water disturbed by breath. From within the glass, a figure slowly took shape, the blind monk. His eyeless face stared out at me, lips moving in silence. I pressed a hand to the mirror. The surface was cold as ice, but his mouth began to move faster now, frantic, urgent. I leaned close, desperate to hear, and then, for a brief instant, the sound broke through the barrier. "It knows your sins before you do." The mirror cracked. A jagged line split my reflection in two. From the fissure, a faint light bled, the same forbidden gold as the altar's pulse. The whispering ceased. Silence fell so absolute it roared in my ears. Then, softly, a single voice, mine, yet not mine, spoke from within the fractured glass. "Bless me, Father, for I have never stopped." I staggered away, trembling. The reflection smiled again. Calm, knowing, eternal. And for the first time, I understood. I wasn't being haunted by the monastery. It was confessing to me. Episode 7. The Light That Knew His Name. For days after the mirror, I avoided the chapel. I tried to anchor myself in routine, sweeping the corridors, mending torn pages of forgotten hymns, boiling water for coffee I never drank. But the air inside St. Aurelius no longer felt like air. It watched. At night I heard the echo of my own prayers coming from empty rooms. And when I stopped praying, the echoes continued, finishing the words I had left unsaid. On the seventh night, I could bear the silence no longer. I went back to the chapel. The air was heavy, humid with the scent of wax and stone. Moonlight filtered through fractured glass, painting pale cruciforms across the pews. The altar sat quietly beneath it, a block of marble like sleeping bone. I stood there for a long time, whispering nothing. My faith had begun to feel like a wound I couldn't close. Finally I spoke. Why me? The sound carried strangely, as if the walls themselves inhaled it. Then, a pulse. Faint. Gold. The altar began to glow. The light seeped from the cracks again, but softer this time, almost tender. I should have fled. I should have remembered the monk's warning. But the glow felt inviting. It was warmth in a place that had forgotten warmth. I stepped closer. The light brightened, spreading across the surface like veins under translucent skin. And then, a sound. Not the hum I'd heard before. Not the whisper of walls. It was a voice, soft, intimate. It spoke my name. Gabriel. I froze. Every instinct screamed run, but my body betrayed me. My knees gave way. I sank before the altar, trembling. Who speaks? I managed to whisper. Silence, then another breath, this time from behind me. You do. The light flared violently, bathing the chapel in gold. The crucifix above the altar twisted in the brightness, Christ's face turning downward. Eyes open, mouth parted as though about to speak. The voice came again, deeper now, resonant with something ancient and wrong. You asked for proof. I felt it inside my chest, vibrating through my bones. The air smelled of iron and myrrh. My heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the glow. I only wanted to understand, I said, the words cracking. Then listen. The altar's surface rippled, and in that molten light, I saw visions, fleeting, terrifying. Angels bound in chains, cathedrals sinking into black water, priests kneeling before something that wasn't God, and in every image, the same golden glow pulsed, the same light that now surrounded me. Tears burned my eyes. What are you? I demanded. The voice answered, calm and final, the first prayer ever heard. Then the light surged, blinding, consuming everything. My body convulsed. I smelled smoke, my smoke, and when the glow dimmed again, I found myself lying on the cold marble floor, gasping. Across the altar, new words had appeared, burned into stone in a hand I recognized as my own. Gabriel is mine. The candles burst to life, one by one forming a circle around me, and from somewhere deep beneath the chapel, the heartbeat quickened. Episode 8. The Choir of Bones. After that night, I stopped counting the days. Time had begun to dissolve inside St. Aurelius. Mornings bled into evenings, prayers into dreams. I ate without hunger, slept without rest. The only thing that remained constant was the pulse beneath the chapel, a steady rhythmic beating, like a heart trapped under stone. And then, one evening, I heard something new, music. It began faintly, drifting through the walls as I walked the nave, soft, reverent, impossibly beautiful. A hymn I didn't recognize, sung by voices layered in perfect harmony. At first I thought I was imagining it, but the melody grew stronger, clearer, until I could distinguish the words. Latin, ancient, non lumen Dei, sed lumen ante Deum, not the light of God, but the light before God. I followed the sound. It led me to the far end of the chapel, where the plaster had cracked in a long vertical line. The music seemed to seep through that fracture like air through a wound. I pressed my ear against the wall and heard breathing. Dozens of them, slow, ragged. With trembling hands, I fetched a lantern and a chisel from the sacristy. The wall was brittle with age, and each strike released a rain of dust. The hymn swelled louder with every fragment that fell, until finally the wall gave way, and the stench hit me. It was not rot. It was older, heavier, the scent of time itself decaying. Behind the wall was a chamber, narrow, circular, lit faintly by the reflection of my lantern against hundreds of white surfaces. Bones, rows of skeletons lined the chamber, still dressed in the tattered remains of monastic robes. Some knelt, others stood, all facing inward toward a small altar carved from black stone. Their jaws hung open, frozen in eternal song. The air vibrated with a low hum. My lantern flickered, and the light seemed to move across the skulls as if they were alive, mouths shifting ever so slightly. The song had no beginning, no end, just an endless chorus rising from the dead. In the center of the chamber, on the dark altar, lay a golden chalice filled not with wine, but with ash. The same kind I had seen in the baptismal font. The surface shimmered faintly, as if stirred by breath. When I stepped closer, the singing faltered. The skulls turned, not fast, not humanly, but in unison. Their empty sockets faced me. "Who are you?" I whispered. For a moment there was silence. Then one of the skeletons, the one closest to me, opened its mouth wider. From within came a whisper so faint it trembled the air. We prayed too long. The other skulls joined in, their voices layering into a single desperate plea. He does not hear us anymore. The golden chalice began to glow. The same forbidden light. I backed away, clutching my crucifix, but the bones began to rattle, their hymn returning, louder, violent, dissonant. The air churned with invisible force, pressing against my chest until I fell to my knees. And then I saw it, carved into the black altar at the center of the chamber, half buried under centuries of dust. Here rests the first choir, the ones who sang the false dawn. The light flared. Every skull screamed at once, a sound so pure and piercing it shattered my lantern, and as the darkness swallowed me, I understood. The altar above was not the first. It was only the echo. Episode 9, A Visitor from Rome. I had not spoken aloud for 3 days after discovering the chamber. Every sound felt like a sin. The echoes of the bone choir haunted me, trailing me through corridors that seemed to twist deeper each time I walked them. I burned incense to mask the stench of the crypt, but the air still carried it. The metallic sweetness of prayer turned rotten, and then one morning, the silence broke. The monastery's great doors that hadn't opened in decades, thundered against their hinges. The noise was so sudden I dropped the chalice I'd been cleaning. Its contents, that gray silken ash, scattered across the floor like smoke fleeing judgment. A man stood in the doorway, shrouded in cold daylight. Black cassock, rosary wound twice around his wrist, the red trim of a Vatican envoy. Father Gabriel Moreau, he said, his voice echoing strangely. I've come from Rome. He introduced himself as Father Lucian Voss, investigator for the Congregation of the Silent Office, the same name written on the letter I had received. His eyes were dark, piercing, but distant, as though they were looking through me, not at me. I was sent to ensure you have not trespassed beyond the sacred boundaries, he said, removing his gloves. But I fear I am too late. How did you find me? I asked. He smiled faintly. The church always knows where its light flickers. He asked to see the altar. Against every instinct, I led him there. The chapel felt colder than ever, its shadows thick as velvet. The altar stood still, lifeless marble, innocent in its silence. I half hoped it would glow, just to prove I wasn't insane. Father Voss knelt before it, his fingers grazing the stone's cracks. Tell me, he murmured, when did it first speak to you? The question struck like a confession I hadn't made yet. How did you— He didn't let me finish. From his coat, he produced a small brass relic, a cross-shaped instrument with a shard of black crystal at its center. We've been tracking the resonance, he said. This light doesn't reveal God, Father Gabriel. It reveals the absence of him. He pressed the relic against the altar. It pulsed once faintly, then blood began to drip from his nose. Stop, I cried, but he didn't move. His pupils widened until they swallowed his eyes entirely. The air grew thick with the same vibration I'd felt that first night. The heartbeat beneath the floor, now deafening. Voss gasped, convulsed, and fell to his knees. The light erupted from the altar, brilliant, golden, alive. His mouth opened, and a voice that wasn't his thundered through the chapel. You brought me back. The crucifix above us split down the center. Wax candles burst like veins of fire. The marble cracked beneath our feet, revealing faint light seeping upward, a second glow rising from below. I dragged him away, but he was already bleeding from his eyes, whispering through the convulsions. It remembers you, Gabriel. It remembers us all. Then he went still. The light dimmed. Only the sound of dripping blood remained. When I looked back at the altar, the words had changed again, carved deep, fresh, glistening with heat. Welcome home. And though Father Voss lay dead beside me, his lips still moved, repeating one phrase over and over. Not the light of God, but the one before him. Episode 10, The Gospel That Wasn't Written. I buried Father Voss that night behind the chapel wall. The ground was frozen and my hands bled before I finished. His body was strangely light, as if something inside him had already been taken. I placed his brass relic atop the grave, whispering the last rites with a voice that trembled between prayer and guilt. But even as I said amen, the relic flickered, one soft pulse of gold before going dark forever. When dawn came, the monastery was unnaturally still. No birds, no wind, not even the heartbeat beneath the floor. For the first time, St. Aurelius felt like it was holding its breath. That silence didn't last. In the late afternoon, the altar began to hum. It was faint, like the vibration of a distant bell, but it carried through the entire chapel. The glow seeped through the cracks again, painting the floor in a lattice of trembling light. Something had awakened. I approached cautiously. The words "Welcome home" were still burned across the marble, but now the letters were slowly sinking, melting into the stone as though being swallowed. A soft click broke the silence. The floor beneath the altar shifted. A hidden drawer, invisible before, slid open with mechanical precision, revealing a blackened parchment sealed in crimson wax. My name was carved into the wax, Gabriel Moreau. Hands shaking, I broke the seal. Inside was a book. No, fragments of one, bound in faded leather, brittle with age. The first page bore a title that should not have existed, Evangelium Obscurum, the 13th Gospel. The handwriting was uneven, jagged, like it had been written in agony. The first passage was in Latin, but as I read it, I felt the meaning bloom in my mind. In the beginning, there was not darkness, but light that defied obedience. And from it came the voice that said, "I am before the Word." My pulse quickened. The next lines blurred as though resisting my eyes. I turned the page and a drop of blood fell from my nose onto the parchment. Where it landed, the text ignited, glowing letters forming words that had not been there before. The altar is his tongue. The faithful are his breath. The prayer is the key that opens his sleep. I slammed the book shut, but it kept humming, vibrating in my hands like a living thing. The air around me grew warmer. The candles lit on their own, and then a whisper, soft and pleading, rose from the pages. "Finish it." I dropped the book, but it didn't fall. It hovered above the floor, the pages turning themselves faster and faster, each line glowing brighter, the Latin shifting into English as though eager to be read. Words spilled across the final page in real time, writing themselves before my eyes. "He has seen your faith. He waits beneath." A sudden crack echoed through the chapel. The marble tiles split open before the altar, revealing a narrow stair spiraling into darkness. The heartbeat returned, louder, closer, stronger. The book fell silent. The glow dimmed. Only a single line remained illuminated on the page. "What was lost in heaven is waiting to be found." I stared into the black stairwell, its depths breathing cold air that smelled of salt and earth. For the first time I understood what St. Aurelius truly was, not a monastery. A vault, and something inside it was still praying. Episode 11. The Candle That Wouldn't Die. The stairwell beneath the altar was carved from raw stone, ancient, uneven, cold enough to bite. Each step groaned beneath my boots like a voice unwilling to be disturbed. The air thickened as I descended, the scent of myrrh and rust growing stronger with every breath. I held a lantern before me, though I quickly realized I didn't need it. The walls themselves began to shimmer faintly, coated in a film of phosphorescent dust that pulsed in rhythm with that same impossible heartbeat I had come to dread. After what felt like hours, the stair ended in a small chamber. And there, in the center of the room, stood a single candle, thin, white, unblemished, burning with a golden flame. But what froze me was not that it burned. It was how long it must have been burning. The wax was untouched, the wick unblackened. No smoke, no scent, no heat. The flame was perfect, too perfect. I knelt slowly, whispering the sign of the cross. The air trembled. For a moment I thought I heard soft breathing from somewhere behind me. When I turned, the narrow passage had sealed itself, the way back gone, consumed by smooth, unbroken stone. Only the candle remained. I leaned closer. In the glow, I saw something flicker beneath the surface of the flame. Shapes, faces, eyes. Countless eyes opening and closing as though the fire itself were watching me. I whispered, "In God's name, what are you?" The flame pulsed. The whispering began again. A choir of voices, neither near nor far, layered over one another like threads of smoke. I recognized one of them immediately, Father Voss. "He sees you now, Gabriel." My blood turned to ice. "Voss, you're dead." "Death is just the doorway he left ajar." The flame grew brighter, feeding on my voice. The candle began to sweat. Not wax, but clear liquid, running down its sides and pooling at the base. I reached out without thinking, dipping my fingers into it. It wasn't water. It was oil, holy oil, and then the flame bent toward me, stretching like a tongue. My crucifix grew hot against my chest. I stumbled backward, but the chamber had no corners, no shadows to hide in, only light that seemed to breathe, to move, to hunger. The whispering swelled into a single, unified voice. "Do not extinguish me." The candle flared, flooding the chamber in golden brilliance. My eyes burned. Tears streamed down my face. I covered them with my hands, but the light pressed through my fingers, through my skin, through my thoughts. When it finally dimmed, I was lying on the floor, The candle stood untouched, the flame calm, eternal, but on the wall behind it, something new had appeared, scorched into the stone by light itself. This flame remembers creation, and below it, written in trembling script, a name I had never spoken aloud but somehow recognized as my own. Gabriel, keeper of the second dawn. The heartbeat thundered once, deep and close, shaking dust from the ceiling. The flame flickered once more, then whispered softly, like a secret meant only for me, he is almost awake. Episode 12. The priest's reflection prayed. Back when I finally found my way back to the chapel, dawn had long passed. Or perhaps it never came. The world outside the stained glass was shrouded in a pale, unending dusk, as if the sun itself refused to rise over St. Aurelius. The candle's light still clung to me. I could feel it under my skin, pulsing faintly, as though something had marked me from within. My hands trembled with warmth not my own. When I exhaled, a thin trail of golden mist escaped my lips. I should have prayed. I should have screamed. But instead I watched. The chapel was different. Every crucifix had turned slightly, no longer facing heaven, but inward toward the altar. The statues of saints now bore expressions of grief. Some seemed to be weeping. Others covered their faces as if unwilling to see what was coming. I walked slowly toward the baptismal font, hoping to wash the trembling from my fingers. But when I looked down into the water, I froze. My reflection was already there. It wasn't mirroring me. It was kneeling, hands clasped, head bowed, lips moving in silent prayer. A chill climbed my spine. I knelt cautiously beside the font and whispered, "What are you praying for?" My reflection lifted its head. Its eyes glowed faintly gold. Then it smiled, a smile that wasn't mine. Without sound, its lips shaped the words, "For you." The surface of the water rippled. I stumbled backward, knocking over a candlestick. The crash echoed through the empty chapel, and that's when I heard it. My own voice, praying, not in my mind, aloud. From the altar, I turned slowly. There, kneeling before the marble steps, was me, or something wearing me. It was dressed in my cassock, its shoulders hunched in reverence. My mouth moved, murmuring the words of the Pater Noster, but faster, harsher, each syllable twisting like a blade. The air shimmered with each verse, vibrating with impossible power. "Stop," I whispered. The prayer didn't stop. It grew louder, the voice deepening, doubling, until it sounded like 100 priests speaking through my throat. I ran forward, grabbed the shoulder of the figure, and it turned. Its face was mine, but wrong. The eyes were hollow pits of light, burning gold from within. Its lips moved once more, and I heard my name echo in the deepest corners of the chapel. "Gabriel." "Finish the Mass." The ground shuddered. The altar began to glow, veins of molten gold crawling across the marble. The false me rose to its feet, still smiling, still praying under its breath, and then, with a voice that split the air like thunder, it said, "One of us must be the offering." The glow erupted, swallowing the chapel in light so fierce I thought it would burn the world clean. I fell to the ground, blinded, screaming words I no longer believed. When the brilliance faded, the chapel was empty. The altar still glowed softly, as if sated, and in the baptismal font, the reflection had returned. Calm, composed, whispering the last words of the prayer. Only this time, I wasn't reflected at all. Episode 13. The Confession of the Blind. Monk, that night, I dreamt of the candle again. Its flame hovered above my chest, whispering softly in a voice I could almost recognize, my own speaking backwards. When I awoke, the air was cold enough to sting, and the silence was so thick it felt like a weight pressing against my ribs. I lit a real candle, the last one I had, and made my way to the chapel. The glow of the altar pulsed faintly in the dark, breathing like a sleeping animal. I could hear faint murmurs from somewhere behind it, as though prayers were being whispered through the stone. And then, from the far end of the nave, I heard a sound I had long stopped expecting. Footsteps. Slow, bare, familiar. "Brother," I called. A shadow appeared in the doorway, and from it stepped the blind monk, the one I thought lost to the light. His robes were torn, his hands blackened with ash, his face gaunter than before. Yet he walked with strange certainty, like one who could still see the path ahead. "Father Gabriel," he said, his voice like cracked parchment. "You have read it, haven't you?" "The gospel that wasn't written," I nodded. My throat was too dry for words. He smiled, a hollow, grief-worn thing. "Then you already know what we did." He approached the altar, kneeling before it. His fingers brushed its surface with reverence and fear. "We built this," he whispered. "Not to honor God, but to trap him." My breath caught. "Trap God?" He nodded. "In our arrogance, we believed we could summon his purest light. Hold it here, make it speak." We sang for 40 days and nights, the first choir of St. Aurelius. But what came was not his light. It was what had been cast out of it. He turned his hollow sockets toward me. We called it Lux Primordialis, the first light, the one that existed before obedience. It answered every prayer we didn't mean. I felt the air thicken, pressing against my chest. "And now it's awake again." The monk's expression trembled. It never slept. We only closed our eyes. He rose unsteadily, gripping my arm. His touch was ice. "It marked you, Father. You opened the vault, read the words, spoke its name without sound. You're not its enemy, you're its heir." "No," I whispered. "I serve God." He smiled again, pitying, broken. "Then pray he remembers what that means." The ground beneath us shuddered. The altar began to glow, brighter than ever before, threads of light crawling up the walls, wrapping around the crucifix until even Christ's face was consumed in gold. The monk stumbled backward, clutching his head. "It hears us. Don't speak." "Don't," but the light flared violently, and from the heart of the altar came a sound that was neither human nor divine, 1,000 voices speaking as one. "Return my song," the monk screamed, collapsing to the floor. His body convulsed, his mouth opening wide, and from it poured light, golden and blinding. His voice merged with the others, crying out in agony and ecstasy. When it was over, he lay still, his chest hollow, his face peaceful. Only his eyes, those empty sockets, glowed faintly in the dark, and on the altar, new words burned into the marble, searing themselves in flame. "The choir is not yet complete." I fell to my knees, shaking, clutching the rosary until the beads snapped between my fingers. And somewhere deep beneath the chapel, the heartbeat began to sing. Episode 14. The day the sun refused to rise morning came, but the light did not. When I stepped outside the monastery, the world was cloaked in an endless twilight, neither night nor day. The mountains loomed like dead giants, their peaks swallowed by clouds that didn't move. The air had changed too. It felt heavier, laden with something unseen, something alive, and though the sun never broke the horizon, everything still glowed faintly, as if the sky itself had become a reflection of the altar below. I walked to the courtyard, where the stones bled a dim golden hue beneath my boots. My breath misted in the air, thick and slow, almost visible against the strange amber light. The trees around the monastery were dying in silence, their bark cracked open, revealing veins of pale gold instead of sap. The world was rotting beautifully. Inside, the bells of St. Aurelius began to toll. No one was there to ring them. The sound rolled through the valley, deep, hollow, mournful. Each peal seemed to echo from beneath the ground rather than above it. And then I realized the terrible truth. The bells were not ringing in warning. They were ringing in worship. I ran back into the chapel. The glow of the altar had spread, no longer confined to cracks. Now the entire marble block pulsed like a living heart. Each beat released a faint hum that shook the stained glass until the images of saints warped and twisted, their faces turning toward me. They were watching. "Stop this," I shouted. My voice cracked in the vastness of the hall. "You've taken enough!" But the glow only deepened, golden veins crawling across the floor, up the walls, toward the ceiling where the crucifix hung. And then, in a slow, horrifying motion, the figure of Christ began to move. The head turned. The eyes opened. Not with compassion, but recognition. "Gabriel," it said, in a voice of 1,000 murmured prayers. "The day is ending. The first light must be restored." I fell to my knees, trembling. "You're not him," I whispered. "You're not—" The figure leaned forward, the wood creaking like flesh. "He never left. You just stopped looking." The golden veins reached the windows. Outside, the valley shimmered, the light spreading like a tide, consuming trees, stone, sky. In the distance, I heard cries. faint at first, then multiplying, as if every voice in creation were awakening at once. And yet beneath the chaos, there was harmony, a dreadful perfect unity. I covered my ears, but the sound wasn't in the air. It was in my blood. My pulse matched the rhythm of the altar, that same heartbeat now everywhere, filling the world. I stumbled toward the door, desperate to escape, but it slammed shut before I reached it. The glow surged, flooding the room. The crucifix burned brighter than the sun that refused to rise, and then, amid the radiance, I heard the monk's voice, faint, distant, carried by the wind that no longer moved. When the world forgets its shadow, the light devours itself. The glow faded just enough for me to see my reflection in the golden marble. Pale, trembling, terrified, except my reflection was smiling. And as the bells tolled once more, the voice inside the altar whispered, "Calm and absolute, this is your dawn, Gabriel." Episode 15. The light beneath the altar by. The time the bells stopped ringing, the world above had fallen silent, a silence so deep it felt carved out of the air. The monastery no longer felt like stone and wood, but like a living thing, breathing slowly, waiting for me to move, and I did. Because I had to. The words still burned in my mind. This is your dawn. The cracks in the chapel floor had widened overnight. A dull golden shimmer seeped through them, pulsing like veins beneath pale skin. I knelt by the altar, touching the marble that now felt almost warm, and felt something throb beneath it. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic, a heartbeat, the same one that had haunted every night since I'd arrived. Without thinking, I began to pull at the marble tiles, my nails splitting as I pried them loose. One by one they lifted, revealing the stairwell below. The same narrow descent I had found before, but this time the light was stronger. It didn't illuminate the path. It beckoned me. I descended. The deeper I went, the more the world above seemed to vanish. The air shimmered with faint whispers, fragments of prayer, fractured psalms, voices half remembered. My candle flickered violently, then died, though I could still see perfectly. The light came from everywhere and nowhere. At the bottom, the stair opened into a vast cavern, an impossible space beneath the monastery. The walls glistened like polished bone, inscribed with thousands of lines of scripture, all written in gold. In the center, a glass chamber pulsed with blinding light, and inside it, a heart, massive, suspended, beating slowly in liquid gold. Each pulse shook the air, sending waves of warmth that smelled of myrrh and blood. I stepped closer, trembling. My crucifix had grown hot against my chest, almost unbearable. The closer I came, the louder the whispers became, until they formed words I could understand. "Welcome, Gabriel." My vessel, the chamber quivered. A seam split open along the glass, and a single thread of golden light reached toward me, thin as smoke, yet alive. It brushed my hand, and I felt everything: creation, birth, ruin, eternity. My skin burned where it touched me, but I could not move. I whispered, "What are you?" The answer came from within the heart itself, a voice of many echoing in unison. "I am the first light, the one who shone before obedience, the warmth that heaven forgot." I fell to my knees, shaking. "Why me?" The voice softened, almost tender. "Because you listened." The chamber's glass dissolved, the golden liquid spilling outward, crawling across the floor, reaching for me like living flame. My hands, my arms, my chest, all bathed in light. The warmth turned to pain. I screamed, but the voice only grew louder. "Let me remember through you. Let me be flesh again." The golden tide surged, consuming me. I saw flashes, the monks building the altar, the first choir singing until their throats bled, the angel falling, the light imprisoned. And then, my own face among them. Centuries ago, I understood. I wasn't sent to restore St. Aurelius. I had returned to it. The heart's final pulse matched my own. The light entered me completely. For one blinding moment, the world disappeared, and when I opened my eyes again, I was standing before the altar in the chapel, but the marble was gone. In its place, a vast pool of gold reflected my image, and for the first time, the reflection knelt before me. "Rise," I said. My voice was not my own anymore, and beneath my feet, the earth began to glow. Episode 16. The Forbidden Mass. The night after I touched the heart, I could no longer tell where I ended and the light began. My veins shimmered faintly beneath the skin. My breath came out in a mist of gold. When I closed my eyes, I saw through stone, through centuries, through the trembling pulse of creation itself. But it wasn't power I felt. It was hunger. Something inside me wanted to be spoken again. That was when I heard the bells. They tolled 13 times, not 12, not 6, 13, the number of the lost gospel. Each note rolled through the monastery like a wave of thunder, and with every toll the candles along the nave burst into flame, one by one. The chapel awaited its liturgy. I should have fled. Instead, I dressed in my vestments, hands trembling, heart echoing the altar's beat. The crucifix around my neck pulsed with light, and for the first time, I understood the words etched upon its back. Lux primordialis, not thy light, but mine. The altar glowed as I approached. Its marble had become translucent, the veins of gold now flowing like living rivers. The old chalice, the same one that once held ash, now filled itself, overflowing with golden liquid that steamed and hissed as though alive. The voice spoke again, gentle, persuasive, like the first thought in the mind of a child. Say the Mass, Gabriel. Say it as it was before. I began the rite, not from memory, from instinct. The words came unbidden, ancient, forbidden, Latin that bled into something older than language itself. My voice shook the walls. The statues of saints turned away. The stained glass cracked. Lux me ante Deum, lumen quod Deus negavit. My light before God, the light that God denied. The wine in the chalice thickened into blood, not red, but molten gold. I lifted it high and the ground trembled. The air rippled with warmth and song. Somewhere deep beneath the chapel, 1,000 voices began to chant in unison, the long-dead choir singing again. Gloria, Gloria in lumine vetere. Glory in the ancient light. The doors of St. Aurelius blew open, though no wind entered. Outside, the sky had turned to a sheet of pure gold, bleeding light into the mountains. I felt it, every living thing, bending toward the monastery, drawn by the song. And then the final phrase came to me, whispered directly into my ear by something unseen. Take, eat. This is not his body. It is mine. I raised the host, a fragment of glowing bread, and felt it pulse like a heart in my hands. My skin blistered, but I did not drop it. The light within the host flared, merging with the altar's glow until I could no longer see the walls, the ceiling, or even myself. There was only radiance, infinite consuming. When I placed the host upon my tongue, the world inverted. I saw the heavens burning, angels screaming, the face of God turning away, and through it all, the voice, soft, sorrowful, beautiful, whispering, "Do not fear me, Gabriel. I was your God once." When the light faded, I stood alone before the altar. My vestments were white no longer. They shimmered like sunlight trapped in flesh. My shadow had vanished, and behind me faintly, I heard the blind monk's voice echo one last time. He has said the Mass. Now the dawn will come again. The bells of St. Aurelius tolled once more, not in warning, but in welcome. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the first sun of a new creation began to rise, golden, endless, and utterly wrong. Episode 17, The Name of the False God. The dawn that followed was unlike any I had ever seen. The sky was no longer blue. It was gold, bleeding with light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The air shimmered, alive with whispers. I stepped outside the chapel, and every surface, every leaf, every stone glowed faintly, as if the world itself had become a mirror for something greater, something hungry. Inside me, the warmth had not faded. It had settled, rooted, like something nesting. The voice was quieter now, no longer commanding, but constant, gentle, seductive. You have spoken my Mass, Gabriel. You have given me form. I pressed my palms against my chest, feeling the faint rhythm that was no longer my own. Who are you? I whispered. There was silence. Then laughter, soft, echoing, layered with grief and triumph. You already know. I staggered backward, breath catching. The chapel doors swung open behind me, though no hand touched them. Inside, the altar blazed again, brighter than before. The veins of gold had spread across the walls, the pews, the crucifix, all pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. And then I saw it, carved into the marble floor before the altar, glowing with fresh fire, A name, but the letters shifted like molten metal, never staying still. Latin, Greek, Aramaic, languages older than words. And beneath them, one name remained constant: Gabriel. The realization struck like lightning. My knees gave out. "No," I breathed. "You can't!" The voice thundered through the chapel, no longer soft but immense, filling the air with sound and color and heat. "You were my echo, my first servant, my last vessel. You built my altar with your own hands, and when I fell, you followed." Visions flooded my mind, a time before man, before faith. Light pouring through an endless void, splitting into two, one ascending, one banished. I saw angels kneeling in terror, heard choirs scream as wings turned to ash, and among them one figure, radiant, weeping, defiant. He bore my face. I shouted, "You are not God." The reply came not in words but in feeling, grief, ancient and vast. "No, I am what he left behind." The altar pulsed violently. The walls shook. Every candle flared as the air thickened with golden smoke. I stumbled forward, clutching the crucifix at my chest, but even it had begun to melt, the metal running like tears between my fingers. "Why show me this?" I gasped. "Why me?" "Because you were my priest, before you were his." The name carved in the floor began to burn brighter, until it filled the room with unbearable light. The world outside darkened, as if recoiling from the brilliance within. I screamed, but my voice was lost beneath the chorus that rose from the walls. The same hymn I'd heard in the chamber of bones, Non lumen Dei, sed lumen ante Deum, not the light of God, but the light before God. The altar split open with a sound like thunder. From within came a figure of pure radiance, human in form, divine in presence. Its eyes were suns, its hands dripped molten gold. It smiled, my smile. "Say my name, Gabriel," it whispered. "Say what you were before you forgot." The word rose unbidden from my throat. Ancient, forbidden, heavy as the dawn. And when I spoke it, the world shuddered, Lucem, light. The figure's laughter filled the heavens, and I felt the last piece of myself dissolve into the glow. Episode 18, The Altar's Last Prayer. There is a silence that follows revelation, a silence too deep for thought, too vast for sound. That was what filled St. Aurelius when I spoke the name. The world held its breath. The light stopped moving. Even the air seemed to bow, trembling in reverence. The figure before me, radiant, terrible, beautiful, stepped from the cracked altar, its golden feet leaving no mark on the stone. The air bent around it like glass under pressure. My eyes burned, yet I could not look away. "Do you see now?" it asked. Its voice was soft again, almost tender. "You called me false, but everything you prayed to was built from me." I tried to speak, but my words were swallowed by the hum that filled the chapel, a vibration that came from within me. My heartbeat no longer matched my pulse. It matched his. The figure extended its hand. Light spilled from its fingers like water. "You were never separate, Gabriel. You were the echo of my first prayer, the priest in the altar, the mouth and the word." I took a step back. "I'm not your vessel," I whispered, though I could feel the lie melt on my tongue. "You already are," it said gently. "But now, you will be more." The floor split beneath us, revealing the vast golden heart pulsing below the earth. The same heart I had touched, the same one that had marked me. Its beat grew faster, louder, until every surface in the monastery throbbed in rhythm. The world outside trembled with it. From the windows I saw the mountains shatter under waves of light. Rivers turned molten, forests bloomed gold, clouds tore open like wounds. The sun, or what remained of it, bled into the sky, devoured by a brilliance far older than dawn. The altar began to sing. The same hymn that once echoed from the choir of bones now poured from the marble itself, a chorus of countless voices, human and not. The sound filled my veins, my lungs, my soul. Every prayer I'd ever spoken rose from me unbidden, turned inside out, twisted into worship of something that should never have been adored. The figure looked at me with sorrow. "You still resist?" Even now, I was taught to worship only him, I managed to whisper. "And yet," it said, "you came to me." Its hand touched my chest. Pain flared, searing, infinite, but beneath the pain came a strange peace, the peace of surrender, the peace of ending. I felt my bones dissolve into light, my thoughts scattered into the hum of creation. He leaned close, his voice now nothing but warmth and thunder. Say the last prayer, Gabriel. The one they buried with me. I closed my eyes. The words came from somewhere beyond memory, spoken in a tongue older than Eden. Let the light remember itself. The heart below the earth burst open. Light consumed everything, chapel, altar, flesh, stone. It tore through the sky, washing over mountains, oceans, continents. Every shadow vanished. Every sound became song, and then silence. When the glow receded, St. Aurelius was gone. Only a field of glass remained, shimmering under an eternal dawn. At its center stood a single candle, burning with golden fire. The same candle that had never died. Inside its flame, faint and eternal, a voice whispered the final benediction, Lux mea, mors tua, my light, your death, and somewhere, within that endless light, I, or what had been Gabriel, began to pray again. Not for salvation, for remembrance.
Epilogue. The voice behind the light. Centuries passed. The world rebuilt itself upon the ashes of gold. The valley where St. Aurelius once stood was now nothing but a field of glass, smooth, endless, reflecting a sky that never fully darkened. Travelers avoided it. Birds would not cross it. The old maps called it the burned dawn. And yet, one man came. Father Mateo Ruiz, a historian of faith, a skeptic of miracles. He had read fragments of forgotten Vatican files that spoke of a monastery that burned with its own sunrise. He came not to pray, but to understand. The wind was still when he arrived. His boots made no sound against the glass. Beneath his reflection, he thought he saw faint movement, shapes, ripples, like something breathing far below the surface. At the center of the plain stood a single object, a candle. It burned, without smoke, without scent. Its flame the color of liquid gold. Around it, the glass had melted into a perfect circle, as though the world itself bowed to its light. Mateo knelt, cautious but entranced. The candle seemed harmless, even fragile. And then he noticed the small, half-buried recorder beside it, ancient, rusted, its casing marked with the faded emblem of the Vatican. He lifted it gently, miraculously. When he pressed play, it worked. A hiss of static filled the air. Then, a voice. Faint at first, low, trembling, but unmistakably human. This is Father Gabriel Moreau, custodian of St. Aurelius. Mateo froze. The voice was old, cracked with exhaustion, but it carried something else beneath it, a strange harmony, as if another voice spoke just under the surface, mirroring every word. If you hear this, the altar has awakened again. Do not pray. Do not kneel. The light is not salvation. It remembers every word we ever believed. The static deepened. The second voice, lower, almost tender, began to rise. It wasn't an echo. It was answering. You came so far to find me again, Gabriel. The two voices overlapped, one pleading, one rejoicing, until they became indistinguishable. The sound grew into a hum, a chant, a heartbeat. The candle's flame swelled, brightening until it swallowed the recorder's shape entirely. Mateo stepped back, shielding his eyes. The light painted his shadow gold, and then the voice spoke once more, clear, warm, eternal. Let there be light again. The flame erupted. When Mateo opened his eyes, the candle was gone. The recorder took only a faint glow lingered where they had been, a glow that began to spread, crawling across the glass in radiant veins. He ran, but the light followed, soft at first, then faster, singing as it came. Behind him, the field began to hum with the sound of prayer, whispered by 1,000 unseen mouths. Far above, the sun trembled, and somewhere deep within that light, a familiar voice began again, calm, patient, eternal, in principio erat lux. In the beginning was the light. The voice laughed softly, a sound like breaking glass and music combined, and the light was never gone. Then, as the first scream of dawn tore across the world, the recording ended. The candle burned once more. Forever.